Okay. This was a very impromptu decision to do a live. So I think up to right now, right up to just a moment ago, there wasn't anyone. So I was taking my time setting up. I hope you can hear me if anyone's watching me live. So this impromptu decision to do this without being really ready is not very typical of me. I like to be ready, but it was it's quite a big moment that I had this morning spiritually, and about, I guess, my own calling. And since so much of my work, like on my podcast, which is, the title of my podcast, the name of my podcast is Becoming Me, right? And so much of my work is about how we can walk into the person that we were actually created to be, which is so hard to do. Actually, I think anybody who has the desire to know who is it that they are and to live the life that they're called to live. For many of us, that never really gets more beyond like a desire, a wish. And, we often feel like we're not really making progress, and we don't know why. I've been working towards, I guess, slowly sharing all the various things that go into making this journey, this interior journey, right? Because there's so many aspects of it. And I think this morning was one of those times when something happened in my own journey, and it was such a teaching moment for me. I felt like in obedience, I needed to document this by also sharing this, I think, live, so that it's unfiltered. I think it's part of the process for consolidating this truth for me. So, and the prompt for this actually is from I'll say, she's my business coach. I'm not a paid client yet because, I don't know, God hasn't, called me to do that yet, because I'm not in the season of my business to qualify for her program. Her name is Jerisha Hawk. You may have seen me share some of her content on my Instagram stories. She's also a woman of faith, and I've always appreciated how she talks about, even building her business as a call of obedience, of spiritual obedience to God. And watching her latest IG live recording, which is a paid subscriber content, it just really called me out this morning. I felt God speaking to me. And I just want to give a sharing for any of you who want to know your calling, like you've been thinking, I want to know what my calling is. I want to live out my calling. Just to give you a sense of how long this journey is, how many twists and turns it can take, and how challenging it is to make. I want to give you a bit of the milestones in my journey, and one just happened this morning, which I need to pray more about. And I'm still on the way, right? Okay, so especially for those of you who are a bit newer to following me and hasn't listened to my podcast episodes, may not know anything about my background. As a student, so as a child, as a teenager, and as a young adult, I think most people who knew me thought of me as someone, on the road to success, including, in any traditional sense of the word. I was doing pretty well academically. I was in good schools, among the top schools, all the way to university, where I was in the University of Toronto in Canada, where I double majored in psychology and philosophy, and in a sense took, whatever remaining courses I had left outside of the two majors. I took whatever courses I could on Catholic theology, history. So in a sense, when I graduated from university, I actually won a medal for psychology, but also for this interesting medal called Christianity, and is a Christianity and culture medal, but actually it's meant for a student in the Catholic college that I belong to, who I think graduated with the highest GPA in philosophy, who has also taken a lot of courses in theology or religion, or in kind of like in the college. Okay, so for me, my desire when I went to university initially was to do theology and philosophy, but and I actually intended to go to a completely different university. What is another story for another day? But the Lord led me to a secular university, and so I ended up studying philosophy, psychology, and also as many, theology and church history courses as I could. And I had some really good professors. In fact, my favorite philosophy professor was a brilliant philosophy professor, was himself a Catholic and a scholar of the Jesuit theologian Bernard Lonergan, who is also an incredible theologian. And learning about Bernard Lonergan's philosophy, or the way that he understood philosophy, into the intellectual tradition, on our intellect and faith, how reason and faith got together, really literally changed the way I thought of my faith, the way I thought of knowledge. Okay. And so that was in university. I still didn't know what it was that I was meant to do after that. I've always had this sense that I need to find what the answer is. I'm not content with the traditional paths, that people take, because I felt that life had to be more than just having, a successful career in whatever sense, right? I mean, and I would admit I'm in a position of privilege. My parents were in a situation where they could afford to send me overseas. They were not dependent on me to come out to earn my income as soon as possible to contribute to the family. And so I had time, and I had time, but I didn't know what to do with that time, right? And after graduation, initially I wanted to come back from Canada to Singapore to maybe work a while and then figure out what's next for me. But my parents, who had also their hopes for me, especially my mom, tried to persuade me that I should go all the way to getting a PhD before I come back, in a way that was actually her own dream, and she didn't get to do it. And the professors in my university as well encouraged me in both psychology and philosophy departments, because they felt I could do the work, right? And I really dragged my feet. My heart was not in it. I didn't really feel convicted about going to graduate studies at that point, because I didn't want to go into either psychology or philosophy specifically to really narrow down. I loved both, and I love how they are so complementary. Philosophy teaching me how to think about the deep questions, about metaphysics, about epistemology. Okay, so if I take out the big words, for those of you who don't enjoy all these big terms, the nature of reality, the nature of knowledge. How do I know that I know? What are the assumptions that people have about what counts as true, that leads to so much conflict and disagreement, right? When it seems often that we're disagreeing about issues, but a lot of times we're disagreeing at an even more fundamental level of assumptions about what counts as true or what counts as real. Okay, so that's a bit of like the philosopher in me speaking. But what I learned even back then in my undergrad days is that I enjoy these subjects, but my favorite thing about them is not just talking about them in a scholarly manner or talking to other people who study these topics. I love to be able to apply them to my life and to share them with people who don't study these topics, who may even be skeptical about what value does psychology or philosophy have? What am I going to do with that? Okay, so I dragged my feet. I didn't really want to go further into doing a PhD in either one of them. But my mom was persistent and very persuasive. And in the end, I applied to the education faculty in the same university that I was in, because education is something I feel very passionately about. I think any one of you who, hey, to those of you who are here, just a couple of you here who are joining me live, I'm just going to keep talking. I don't want to lose my train of thought. Okay, so I think I really lost my train of thought. That's one thing about me. I can't multitask, and I just get so easily distracted. What was I saying? I know I was talking about so education. So those of you who follow my content probably can guess that I enjoy teaching. I enjoy explaining. I really, really believe in the importance of education in the bigger sense, okay? Not just like in schools, but the formation of the human person. So I thought maybe I'll apply to the education faculty and, to their psychology program or and to the philosophy program, the two different departments, right? So there's educational psychology and there's philosophy of education. And I got accepted into philosophy education because I was so late in my application. I was actually past the deadline. The psych education department put me on the wait list because they were full. But, I think very few people applied to philosophy of education, maybe. I got in. In fact, they offered me a scholarship, I took it as an affirmation and a sign that that's where God wanted me to go. So I went, and it was a very interesting experience. Not so much about just what I was learning and studying in terms of the topics, but I realized that other people, the other students in, my classmates, many of whom were older than me, because I was coming in straight from graduation, right? It's a very Singaporean thing to do. Okay. Those of you who are not Singaporean, not Asian, for us, it's like, education is really important, right? A lot of us go from, bachelor's, to master's to PhD straight away. Whereas most of my classmates they came to this program after having worked, maybe having taught in schools or being in some other part of educational systems. And they found that was something that they really felt very passionately about. And that's why they enrolled in this program. They knew why they were there. I didn't know why I was there. I was there because if I had to go to further my studies right away, this was like the least evil, right? But I did very well academically. I mean, I was not the most interested student, but the grades didn't show it. So that kept me stuck as well, because I was doing well. I was doing well enough that even before I finished my master's, they gave me a position in the PhD program. So I stayed, right? And I noticed that the students around me really loved what they were doing, what they were studying. They had certain topics that they were excited about. And after 6 hours of reading in the library, when we gather in the evening, as I say, at the pubs to talk, they still want to talk about what they were reading. And for me, I was just doing the bare minimum that I needed to do to get through the program. I was still getting really good grades, but my interest wasn't there. And with all my spare time, I was actually reading books on spirituality and theology. That was my phase where I think I was still in apologetics. So I was doing a lot of reading on my own to understand my Catholic tradition, and all that, and spirituality, a lot on spirituality. I was going through my own stuff personally as well. But the point is, actually, the signs were clear when I look back now. My heart was really not in the school that I was. And what I count as the greatest accomplishment in my time as a graduate student, even as a PhD student, is not the publications that I published or the national fellowship that I actually somehow won, which I think God has a very funny sense of humor, because that was the one, in Canada, and I'm a citizen by birth. I mean, they're very good with offering support for their citizens for education, right? So the grants and the fellowships, for the scholarships for students, I mean, and sometimes they don't come with a bond, and I was progressing well, at least on paper, in my studies, right? I was presenting at conferences. I was actually getting some publications out. So I actually won a fellowship, but then I dropped out of my PhD because it came a point where it became very clear, I couldn't deny it anymore, that wasn't where God was calling me, right? So let me backtrack a bit. I said my greatest accomplishment, what I count as my greatest accomplishment back then, was not my grades, not the scholarships that I won, but the fact that my PhD supervisor would send other students to talk to me when they were starting their dissertations. Okay, so like they are my peers. In fact, some of them were ahead of me. They were already writing a dissertation even before I was at a point. But I found out that from them that my supervisor, our shared supervisor, let's say, would ask them to come and talk to me because he felt that I could help them clarify their thoughts about how to approach their thesis. Okay, so that was a big affirmation. And then I realized that I really did enjoy helping people clarify their thoughts about their approach, about why the pros and cons of each approach. Well, I'll ask them questions. I realized I was good at asking questions, at helping people get better understanding of where they are, right? I didn't need to be a subject expert in what they were doing. I was just helping them to think. I was teaching them to clarify their thoughts. And I actually did help a couple of my fellow students in their process of finishing a dissertation and defending their dissertation. And they're professors now. I mean, they're professors for years now, in North America. And I'm not. I don't have a doctor in front of my name. At one point, I thought that was what I wanted, right? Dr. N. Yong. And I don't have that credential. But those things, as in that actually to me was, I see it as what I was very proud of, that I was able to help people complete their dissertation by helping them clarify their thoughts. Right? And it's actually a real struggle. And any one of you who did a PhD, finished a PhD, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. There's just so much that you can cover, and there may be so much that you're interested in knowing. To be able to distill that into just about a 300-page dissertation is a huge challenge, right? You have to have very great clarity of thought. You have to be very systematic in, what is just essential to do this particular work. So when I finally had the courage, it took so much courage, oh my God, to step out from my PhD, because it felt like such a huge failure. I felt like I was letting down everyone, all my teachers, my family, people who believed in me, who thought that, I was going to become a professor. It's like the one time I failed, I didn't even finish the degree. I was 5 years into my PhD program. I was ABD, which is all about dissertation. I was, like I said, I even had scholarships along the way. For me, it was such a shameful thing. But when I came to the point, I realized, God helped me realize, I was so unhappy. And I realized the only reason I was staying is to prove myself. I don't know, to not let people down. This was back in 2008, 9, I think around 2008, 2009. And it was a huge relief when I decided to just end I took a leave of absence. The first step was I took a leave of absence for a year from my studies. And I felt the call at that point. The Lord was calling me into full-time ministry. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that entailed, but I went by making myself available. And as things went, developed, I became a full-time volunteer in the parish that I was in, which was not the parish that I grew up in. So nobody knew me, which was great, actually, because it's like I had a fresh start, right? And I'd been away overseas for like practically 10 years before then. So it was like I was starting afresh. And at first it was also very liberating. And then I was in full-time ministry in the parish for practically 6 years, all in, eventually as paid staff. And somewhere along the way, I went from being someone that nobody knew, which I said was great, and I had this enthusiasm and freedom because I've let go of the burdens of expectations of my previous identity, which was like, and the academic or the academic to be, right? To just exploring an entirely new field and exploring what it meant to be me. So along the way, in those 6 years, I very quickly burnt out because although it was a completely different area, everything that was inside me was still the same. Okay, the wounds that were in me were the same. My coping mechanisms were the same. So I was still a perfectionist. I must do well in everything. I was terrified at letting people down. I felt like everything I did must reach really high standards. I held myself to, I think, maybe unreasonable standards. And maybe others too, without knowing. And I always wondered, why is it that people felt pressured sometimes to work with me or be around me, because they instinctively felt like they have to perform at a very high level. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I want to say that that's actually still a part of me, but I was expressing it in a very unhealthy manner. Okay, I made an idol out of, I guess, achievement. But I didn't know it then, but that was my protective mechanism. That was in a sense, you could say a trauma response. Okay, that's how I learned since I was young, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued by performing. Okay, by exceeding expectations. That's how I was loved. Well, that's how I felt I would get attention and approval and affection. And so while I burnt out, as I was burning out in full-time ministry, I was also earning a reputation. So now suddenly I wasn't, a stranger anymore. I wasn't some unknown person anymore. Suddenly my name and Yong, people, a lot of people began to hear my name or know my name before they knew me. And then I found that there were already expectations attached to that name, that people who didn't know me personally had certain expectations of me. And this was just so deja vu, because back when I was in school, because I was head prefect, that was the kind of thing that happened to me. People who didn't know me personally knew my name and had certain expectations about what I was like and who I was, right? And it's so shackling, okay? Really, really shackling. Oh, I saw my cousins just joined. Hi, Ju. So from a young age, I felt I needed to live up to a certain persona. Okay, there was an expectation that I should behave a certain way. So now I have a new persona as the person who, gave up her PhD and, maybe a promising career in the secular space to go into full-time ministry and serve God's people in that context. And after a while, that became a prison for me. Why? Because internally I wasn't free. Okay, it's not the problem that people have expectations of me. I mean, that's reality. No one cannot have expectations. I think I subconsciously will have expectations on people as well, even if I'm not fully aware that that's happening, right? So what the problem is that I was not interiorly free to not be shackled by those expectations. Okay, I still needed to be the one that always exceeded expectations. So now fast forward, I left the intensity of full-time parish ministry work back in midway through 2014. And so I left the intensity of that, but then the subsequent years after a sabbatical, I was still in the same kind of space, just doing it a little differently, right? I was still the person that would give formation sessions in parishes, to faith communities and all that. And that's been building up. And then in 2020, the call came to start my podcast and to register a business. Both things which I had never planned on doing or wanted to do, honestly. I never felt like that was what I was cut out to do. No desire to do that. But it was obedience. So the same way that I obeyed the prompting to go into full-time ministry, like leave PhD to go into full-time ministry, it's the same way I obeyed in 2020 the call to start a podcast, right? And to register a business, even though I know nothing about this. So once again, I'm in a field that I know nothing about, and I'm learning my way and doing a lot of things that normally I wouldn't do and I don't really enjoy doing, okay? Including showing up on IG like this right now. That's not the kind of thing that I would have done in the past. But it was part of the steps of obedience. So what is it that happened this morning? I've been resisting for a while, even the last couple of years since I started the business and everything. I think I've been resisting a kind of dying of identity. Okay, so I was saying that this is a process of, if we want to discern and live our personal vocation and personal calling, I think none of us know how much dying is in the process, how much dying to older versions of us, how much dying to what we thought was going to be the path or the way for us. So often when we think we found a path, or when there's a conversion kind of experience and, we pivot. So for example, for me, like when I dropped my PhD and went to full-time parish ministry. It's so easy to think that now this is it. This is where God wants me to be forever, kind of like in full-time ministry. And actually, it's not the case, right? There was, as things evolved, as he journeyed with me, as my relationship with him deepened, as the healing grew, I guess the healing of my own interior space, and I became freer, I realized his call is always shifting and changing, and I have no idea where he's leading me. And when I started my podcast and registered my company, although, I, as part of setting up a bank account for a business, right? I mean, because it's different from a personal account, I had to have a conversation with the agent at the bank who asked me questions on the phone, right? Like, so how soon do you think you're going to break even? Or like, when do you think you're going to, so basically about like earning revenue. And my answer to her was just, I have no idea, really. I have no idea, because how can I explain to her that the reason I'm doing this wasn't because I had planned and thought out why I wanted to start a business and how I was going to go about it, but literally it was just an act of obedience to God, right? It was also really humbling to be able to, sound in my head kind of stupid. Like, I don't know, I have no idea. But it's just following the breadcrumbs, right? But I had no idea. I had no idea how challenging all this was going to be, or where God was actually intending to lead me through all of this. And what I realized today while watching Jerisha Hawk's IG recording, although she was talking in a different context, but I knew God was speaking to me, was that God is calling me out again from what I know and from the space that I was in the previous season of my life, right? So prior to 2009, I was in the space of, I was in academic studies. I was on a path to becoming an academic, and I had a certain identity there. And then the next season, I was called to be in pastoral ministry full-time in a very specific kind of context within church. And during those years, I learned so much more about what it means to live the faith, to walk with people, as I struggled to live my own faith more authentically and with more integrity. And I learned so much more about what the church actually teaches, specifically about the call to lay people, that our mission is in the world, right? So as much as I was learning all this and I was sharing these with other lay people whose lives were very much in, the secular spaces, apart from family, also, at work, my own work was still very much in the non-secular space. It was still very much in the churchy kind of space, right? That those are the contexts, as in CONTXT, context in which I worked. But now I realize God is calling me out of that, and he wants to send me to serve a different demographic of people. Not exactly different demographic, but a more specific context, which is different. No more in the church kind of pastoral context, but to draw on what I have learned and experienced in everything that I've gone through, both in the secular wisdom learnings that I had in philosophy and psychology, as well as some of the, you can say, the more religious things that I've learned, and church teaching and spirituality, to use that in a space that's not technically pastoral. Actually, it's actually still pastoral. It's formative and pastoral work, but it's not in the context that I'm used to. It is not general faith formation. It's not specifically about the content of faith or even the content of spiritual development per se, although I have passion for those too. This is about forming a person, combining different streams of understanding for people who are deep in the trenches in the marketplace, who are leaders, especially, although my definition of leader is, broad, but who feel called in that season in their life to really journey more deeply into integration, to knowing themselves and discerning God's call for them. And I want to be able to speak and teach and operate at a level of sophistication, where I felt I wasn't really allowed to do in the previous season of my life, because I needed to be there for a more general audience. I think I still, tended to draw people who liked maybe a bit more intellectual rigor in the way that formation was happening. But I never really felt that I could really let go and do what I desired to do, or what I've been created to fully do. And so I guess today this sharing is both a testimony, an example in the sense of, if you want to know your life's calling, it's a long process of ongoing discernment. Do not make assumptions too early about what that is. Even now, I'm not making an assumption about what the totality of my calling is. Discernment is only always about the next step. And God only shows us what's the next step. And sometimes that next step is so hard to take when it requires us to die to a previous identity, right? It's not just persona, but like who I knew myself to be in the last season, the last 10 years or so. So I don't know what 2023 will hold for me in 2024. I think I will be sharing maybe a bit more in terms of behind the scenes of what's actually happening. I don't know. Some of you may feel that where I'm pivoting to, where I'm moving to, no longer serves you. And I just want to say it has been really good. Like for the length of time of the season where my path and yours, or like what I feel called to share and what you need, has converged. So if you feel that I'm no longer a companion for you as I evolve and discover who God is calling me to be in this season, then I bless you and I thank you for having followed me, if our paths in that sense diverge. But I also welcome those of you who may find that this new direction that I'm taking might actually speak even more deeply and accurately to the struggles in your own life, which I think a lot of that would be, how do I embody and integrate being a person of faith holistically, and not just about doing religion or practicing religion, but as a person in my family, in my relationships, in my families of origin, dealing with the handicaps of my own trauma and becoming more able to love, seeking to become more able to love, to become a better leader, especially, in the context of in secular spaces, while being true to my identity as a child of God. What does that mean? What does it mean beyond all the theoretical and conceptual things that we hear, right? And so I guess this, in a sense, is also a kind of me stepping through the threshold and choosing to do this on a life that I wasn't prepared to do. Is my way of saying yes to God and saying, I don't know where you're leading me, but I'm following. I want to follow the best as I can. And it's terrifying because now I have to fully let go of the persona that I guess I've been building over the last 10 years into becoming the person that, becoming more fully the person that He's called me to be. So thank you all for those of you who popped in and out during the actual live. I will be sharing this, saving this and sharing this, I think on both my Becoming Me podcast account and in this NMN account. And I ask you to pray for me if you're a person of faith, whatever faith tradition you come from, or to wish me well. And if you're someone who is actively discerning your own call, just watch out for more of the content to come. I think I'm getting greater clarity as to what to focus on. Okay, and do watch the full video when you get a chance, because what I want to really emphasize is there are more twists and turns to this journey of finding our calling and living it, and there's so many more things required of us to walk into it. than most of us know or expect or are ready to do. This is really truly the cost of discipleship, of going where we'd rather not go. And yet this is the path to fuller life, more abundant life, becoming our more authentic selves, our truer selves, and living with integrity and becoming bolder to be who we are, and being okay with people rejecting us, being okay with people disagreeing with us, because of course not everyone's going to agree with us. We're not for everybody. The specific task and mission that we're called to is not for everybody. And when we become more our true selves, we become more allowing, more understanding that there'll be people who'll be upset with us with what we say, because maybe it's not the message they need in their season of life. Or maybe, they have some other call and it just seems to conflict, with ours. So I'm going to be stepping out more and more. I pray that God will give me grace to continue to dare to be who I am, to be faithful to Him, and to trust in my calling. And I pray that that would bless more people, and those of you who follow my content, and those of you who will eventually join, maybe who are called to join whatever paid services I have, which will also evolve and change. I have a sense now, as we continue to go into the year and next year. So take care. I wish you good day, good week, and may God give you grace and wisdom to know what you have to do, have the courage to do what you need to do to keep stepping into your calling, to discern where He's calling you, where He's asking you to follow Him. Amen.